We're back from break, and I have with me Bharat Vasan, the chairman of Cana, which is a device that some people have described as a Star Trek drink replicator, which we'll get into. How you doing, Bharat?
I'm great, Michael. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, I wanted to quickly, because it's hard to visualize. I talked about doing this real quickly, just showing people. If you guys look at the screen, what the Cana looks like. I just brought up their YouTube video and their hero reel just to give you an idea. It's this machine sits on the countertop, uh, and creates a whole bunch of drinks from like one cartridge, which is kind of crazy to think about. So with brought it's unlike any kind of like device I've seen. There's I think a lot of larger trends driving this concept. I mean, I enjoyed hearing the story of how like a bunch of guys drinking beer came up with the idea. I think Dave was in the middle of that. Dave Freiberg, who we've had on our podcast, but these advances in things like food science and micromanufacturing that allow us to move production to the very edge. A lot of these things have coming together to make Cana possible. Can you talk a little bit about some of those trends?
Yeah, Michael, you nailed it. The way I describe Cana is it's the closest thing we have to a Star Trek replicator. Infinite variety, lots of personalization, solves the planet's global trash crisis. But it comes from this thesis that, and this much broader trend of if human beings are going to continue to live on this planet, they have to shift their modes of food production. And if the modes of food production are changing, then the modes of food distribution, branding, all of those things must change as well. And that's kind of the core thesis behind Cana. You already see it's not made from cows. You see egg protein that's not made from chickens. And so human beings are finding ways to build all the things they need to not just sustain themselves, but thrive on this planet without destroying it. And originally, when we set these things up in the industrial era, it was really about, well, we need a lot of chickens, we need a lot of cows, and let's put them in the middle of the country where we have feedstock, and then let's get planes, trains, and automobiles to ship the product out of there and process them, and then let's store them. And so we've been thinking a lot about like, well, if that was no longer true and you could synthesize food on the fly, um, what would happen around producing that food in real time? How would you brand it? How would you distribute it? And Canada is really the first take at that. I think there were some early takes at it, very large businesses like Keurig, where they said, look, we don't need to transport all of the coffee. We can just make these pods. I think we've been looking at it more at a deeper level and saying, can we do this for very large categories within the food space, like beverages, which is a $2.3 trillion space? And can we essentially sort of DNA sequence all these beverages? Only 5% of any beverage is really what makes it that beverage. Can we sequence all these beverages, understand what really is in them, and then create some kind of cartridge that reassembles those beverages on the fly? So it's sitting in people's homes, people's offices, and they can have all of that variety, all that personalization in real time with no compromise.
It's a big idea, and one that I would imagine will require a little bit of like educating consumers, or maybe not. Maybe like they'll just be like, you tell them, you show this to them at a Costco or something at the fair, whatever you're going to like, and they'll get it instantly. I mean, have you guys done any early testing? Is this something like consumers have a hard time wrapping their mind around, or is it something they instantly get and like, hey, this is the future?
I think the instant reaction for most people is like, this is the future. If it works, we're going to love it. And I do think human beings in general write about things in sci-fi that they're just fascinated with. There are people building, we have touchscreens today, as an example. You go back to the Starship Enterprise, lots of touchscreens seem really novel 30, 40 years ago. Now they're in the palms of our hands. There's someone building a fusion reactor, someone building a med bay. And I think, the Star Trek replicator is one of those dreams that's existed. People want it. And the question is, when does the technology arc get to the point where people will have it? I do think people will have questions, and I think rightly so, around food security, what is better about it, how are you making it? And I think that's where companies, Cana included, being transparent about how stuff is made, why it's better for them, is actually a really, really good thing. Because then people get to tie the environmental impact, which they want to have, the convenience, variety, all the stuff that they think makes it a 10x better experience, together with the, is it safe, it's made differently, but I kind of understand it, I kind of get it. And we went through this with microwaves. You'll remember, like, there's so many movies, and frankly, back in history when microwaves came out and people weren't really sure,
Yeah.
and whether it was really safe, and people had lots of doubts, and now it's a standard part of every kitchen. It does take time. So this isn't something that's going to happen overnight. It's not like an air fryer where everyone buys one. It is new technology where people go, oh, I don't know how this works. It feels like magic. And maybe
Hmm.
I'll wait for a few people to try it before I get it myself and it becomes mass market. But there'll certainly be millions of people for whom this is like, wow, this feels like living in the future. It's like a self-driving car. I've always wanted it. I just need to know it works. And this is really cool. And you've seen that with Tesla, with Impossible, lots
Yeah.
of other companies.
I had to clarify when I first saw this. I'm like, now I thought, okay, I'm going to obviously supply the alcohol. This thing won't include, like, it makes wine for me, it makes a beer for me. But then when I clarified, you guys are including everything. Like, it's making a beer for me or making wine for me. It's sweetening the drink as well. So you guys have the sweeteners all in one cartridge. Can you talk a little bit about like what people are getting?
Yeah, so what people are getting is a device that they'll buy or lease, and it sits in their office or their home. Um, we think people should only have to pay for what they use. So all of the cartridges, the CO2 cartridge that allows you to make carbonated drinks, the sugar, the ethanol cartridge, the ingredients cartridge, all are shipped to you for free. And then you only pay for what you use on a per drink basis. And usually that is 20 to 50% cheaper than you would find it out there. But it's going to have all of the brands that you find exciting, things that you find exciting that make sense for that particular month. The first device just does cold beverages, but it's one of the goal was to create this sort of Spotify, Netflix like experience where people can sample stuff, they can try an infinite variety of stuff. If they like it, but they don't, it's not quite right, like they personalize it, make it a little sweeter, change the roast, do things that you just can't do with any other product out there because that's the power of this technology.
Hmm.
I think plenty of other use cases where something else is the most efficient thing to do if people just want lots of coffee in quantity. But I think for people who are looking for a machine that truly lets them personalize it and have infinite choice, I think this will be the best choice for them.
Longtime SKS attendees will kind of remember this deep cut. I think we saw um, some of the early attempts at like doing customizable drinks from like the Pika Brews of the world, saying, "Hey, I could create like I can have like a brewer out there that does an interesting recipe. Let him create that." What I'm hearing from you is, and I think what I've seen on your website is there's some ideas that you maybe want to take drink creators recipes or maybe have a like a special mix for the holidays and you could roll that out. So maybe there's an influencer that does a special drink and ultimately you can do that. Talk a little bit about that. Are you going to be working with people to roll out special promotion like recipes on the fly because that's the power of digital connectivity and micro manufacturing?
I think that's also the future of brands, Michael. The world is moving away from, brands that are kind of this one big monolithic brand. And you can see that even with the big brands that partner with influencers, partner with individuals. And I think what you've seen with the TikTok generation is lots of people have audiences, and it's really about, it's their content, it's how they explain stuff, it's how they build followership. And I think a big part of this shift in food is going to be if companies like Cana can invent the technology, you also want to be inventing the brand. Someone else is going to explain it a lot better and create different things differently than a company might. And so creating the tools, creating those creator tools, if you will, the equivalent on the food size, so people can start to synthesize their own beverages, market, explain it in different ways, make it thematic, keep it fresh, is what I think consumers have come to expect. But it's very, very hard to pull off in a retail environment where you've got a fixed number of slots, only so much shelf space, months or years of planning around inventory. I think a technology solution like this starts to free us from some of those constraints and get to a better product for consumers and also a better product for brands.
We have a question from the audience from Scott Heimendinger who wants to know a little bit more if he can talk about the technology in the cartridge. I mean, it sounds like it does sound like a Star Trek technology. You're replicating drinks, you're printing them. You said there's 5% of what makes a drink, the molecules. What is in the cartridge? Is it those flavor molecules?
They're a combination of so So all the compounds you would need to reassemble a beverage. Maybe that's a short
Okay.
way of putting it. And that includes flavors, but it also includes functional components like caffeine. It will include things that are specific to that type of beverage. So a coffee is going to have a different set of compounds than a wine might. And some of those compounds, like for example, vanilla as a flavor, might be shared as notes across wine and coffee. And so the ingredient cartridge that we have, the 92 well cartridge, does the hard job of that combinatorial map across all those compounds. And then the software sitting on top of it basically intelligently recombines those things to give you the exact beverage you're looking for.
If I have my own personal flavor preferences, saying like I don't like the vanilla notes in wine, or I like things a little bit spicier, will this thing do personalization to maybe make the perfect drink for me because I like
Yeah,
these certain things and kind of optimize certain notes and kind of turn down other things?
absolutely. That's the power of, I think, doing the hard work around the atoms so they turn into bits and bytes. Because then human beings are remarkably good at describing what they want. I think what we have trouble with is machines understanding that, taking that, and doing something intelligent with it. And if you look at a lot of the growth of the internet, it's human beings searching for something, and Google came around and search engines came around, but it's helping people find the stuff that they want. That hasn't quite happened in food yet. You can sort of do it at the restaurant, you can sort of do it at home, and someone will make you something. But I think this next wave of appliances and things that are happening in consumer electronics are really about human beings describing what they want, and then a machine intelligently creating something for them that they like, or human beings doing the manual labor to adjust it in very specific ways, but us providing the tools for people to do that. And that just hasn't been done before.
I mean, there's a lot of benefits, like just to pushing this type of micro manufacturing to the edge. I mean, I think you guys have talked about why move all this water. Shipping water is insane. I mean, because that's what drinks mostly are, right? It's uh, a lot of carbon footprint. There's a lot of plastic involved, so that makes a lot of sense. But you guys ultimately want to also move. I think you've hinted at moving beyond drinks. I mean, on a 10-year time horizon. Can you
Sure.
talk about like, do you guys ultimately, if we look at Cana in 2030, will I also be able to buy something that actually is printing food, like or other things?
You know, my so it's very long range. You're right, and it's
Yeah, yeah.
hypothetical.
I gave you
I'm
the
not
it's
saying these things are in our
2035,
roadmap.
10-year time horizon.
Yeah. Well, look, just like Apple wasn't a company that was around making, personal computers, right? It had a much broader vision around the art that computing would fall over time, where processing would get cheaper, faster, Moore's law would apply, and different formats for that same need would apply. I think we see the same thing within food. We see that there's a very large sector in the form of beverages where we can create a product that people can hire to do a job that's very useful, that would be 10x better than anything they have. I think over time we see, we start with shelf stable beverages. And then the question is, as proteins get easier to synthesize on the fly, can you start to infuse proteins into those beverages? Can you start to break off subsets of the food ecosystem like proteins, like starches, so you can start to print at least some of those basic needs on the fly? I think it'll be a while before you can make
Yeah,
like a chicken pad thai or something that
sure.
exotic. But are there staples in your kitchen that, are a more straightforward experience so you don't have to keep restocking them? I think that's certainly within the range of possibilities. And I think the way you get there is through these molecular printers.
Richard Gunther has a question. He says, "Pay as you go, pay as you use sounds a little like vending in the home. What research have you done to determine if consumers will be receptive to that on a countertop appliance, or have you?"
Michael, is that a question about like the pricing model,
Yeah,
or
yeah.
I can?
I think you said like you don't want people to pay for things they don't use. So like as I get a drink, I'm essentially getting charged for it. Which so Richard says
Yeah.
that sounds a little bit like vending in the home.
It Look, I think we're so early in this process that I'm less worried about what exactly the business model will be. Maybe it'll be a subscription, maybe it'll be pay per drink. What we've seen in the data is different people prefer different types of things.
Got it.
And I think our focus is really on, will it be useful? Is this truly a 10x better solution relative to just an established behavior of going to the store or using your Keurig or your Nespresso, whatever it is? And if it is, we'll figure out, what the right pricing model for that is and what the right value is for the consumer. So I think we're probably too early to sit and go through to know exactly what that business model will be. Just like, Apple started with iTunes and it was pay per song, and that was better for that time. And eventually they moved to subscriptions. The world evolves over time. I can't forecast what will be a great experience a year from now. I think, but if it's useful, then we'll figure out, consumers will figure out, hey, what's a fair price to pay for it?
Got it. Well, we could talk about this for a long time. It's such a fascinating device, but I do want to bring on